Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Ever since I was a kid, I loved staying active. I tried all kinds of sports, swimming, dancing, volleyball, and more. But no matter how much I moved, I was always a bit on the chubbier side. It's just how my family is built. My mom always said that was totally okay, and I never felt bad about it. I was happy, healthy, and could do anything I wanted. That changed one day in 6th grade. I was heading to physical education class wearing my usual gym outfit, shorts, and a school t-shirt. I was actually excited because we were starting our volleyball unit, and that was my favorite sport. I was walking down the hallway with my best friend when this boy from my class decided to be a jerk. He was one of those kids who thought they were better than everyone else just because their parents bought them expensive clothes and the latest phones. He walked up to me with this smug look on his face and started pointing at me while talking to his friends. He loudly mocked me, asking if I should really be wearing shorts, and declared that nobody wanted to see that. His friends started laughing and I felt my face getting hot. My best friend grabbed my arm and tried to tell me to ignore him, saying he was just being stupid. But the boy wasn't done. He kept following us, making exaggerated walking motions and holding his arms out to the sides, pretending to be fat. He taunted me by asking how I even fit through doors, and if I had to turn sideways to get through them. Something in me snapped. I'd never been ashamed of my body before, and I wasn't about to starve because of some insecure bully. I turned around and looked him straight in the eye. I'd noticed something about him during our swimming classes that I knew would shut him up real quick. I fired back at him, pointing out how funny it was that he wanted to talk about bodies when he wore the same bra size as me. The hallway went dead silent. Then everybody burst out laughing. Not at me this time, but at him. His face turned bright red, and he just stood there with his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Even his friends couldn't hold back their snickers. See, during swimming class, I'd noticed he was actually quite self-conscious about his chest. He had what people call gynecomastia. Basically, he had developed breast tissue. He always wore dark shirts and hunched over when he walked. I normally would never make fun of someone's body, but he started it, and I finished it. He finally managed to close his mouth and practically ran away. His friends scattered, too, still trying to hide their laughter. My best friend was in shock, exclaiming about what I just said and pointing out his ridiculous facial expression. I simply responded that he shouldn't dish it out if he couldn't take it. The story spread through school like wildfire. Every time he saw me in the hallway after that, he'd turn around and walk the other way. His bullying days were over, at least when it came to body-shaming people. That was 4 years ago. We're both in high school now, and he still can't look me in the eye. Sometimes I see him in the cafeteria or in the halls, and he immediately finds another route to his destination. I actually feel a little bad about it now. I know what it's like to be judged for your body, but at the same time I hope he learned something from that experience. I'm still chubby, still athletic, and still confident. If anything, that incident made me even more comfortable with myself. It taught me that bullies are often just projecting their own insecurities onto others. And the best defense is to stay true to yourself. Or, if pushed too far, give them a taste of their own medicine. These days, I'm captain of the volleyball team and I still love wearing whatever I want. And you know what? Nobody dares to say a word about it. My wife and I have lived in this neighborhood for 16 years. We picked this place because it was so peaceful. But that all changed 6 months ago when a new neighbor moved in next door. The guy was obsessed with social media, particularly YouTube. He was one of those content creators who do anything for views. And when I say anything, I mean literally anything dangerous and stupid you could think of. At first, it was just minor annoyances, loud music while filming, random people showing up at odd hours to help with his videos, that sort of thing. But everything changed when he bought that Cybertruck. Man, you should have seen him parading around the neighborhood like he owned the place. Constantly brag about how indestructible his truck was. One day, my neighbor from across the street came to me asking if I'd seen what that idiot was doing now. When I asked what he was up to this time, my neighbor told me that he was throwing bricks at his truck for his YouTube channel right in his front yard where kids usually play. And true enough, there he was, recording himself throwing bricks at his precious truck. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, he escalated to shooting it with paintball guns, hitting it with baseball bats, and even trying to ram it with his old car. Our neighborhood watch group kept reporting him to the Homeowners Association, but he'd just pay the fines and continue with his stunts. One day, I was working in my garage when he came over. He told me he was planning something epic for his next video and warned me that I might want to keep my windows closed tomorrow. When I asked what he was planning to do, he just smugly replied that he couldn't tell me the details, but assured me it would be explosive, literally, and would definitely get him 1,000,000 views. I immediately called the police non-emergency line to report his suspicious behavior. They said they'd keep an eye on the situation. The next morning, I woke up to him setting up his camera equipment. There was something different this time. He had a small metal container in his hands. I watched through my window as he placed it near his truck's door. That's when I realized what it was. A military-grade smoke grenade he probably bought from some shady website. Before anyone could stop him, he pulled the pin. But what he didn't account for was how weakened his truck's structure had become from all his previous tests. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough. The truck's weakened frame couldn't take it, and within minutes, the whole thing was engulfed in flames. The fire department showed up, followed by the police. He was screaming about his expensive truck being ruined and how he'd sue everyone. But then, the insurance investigator showed up. The insurance investigator asked him to explain what happened, and he had the audacity to claim that his truck just spontaneously caught fire, trying to pass it off as a manufacturing defect. That's when all the neighbors came out with their evidence. Everyone had been documenting his stunts, videos, photos, timestamps of his dangerous behavior. I even had footage from my security camera of him admitting his plan the day before. His face turned pale when the insurance investigator showed him all the compiled evidence of his content creation. Not only did the insurance company deny his claim, but he also got charged with reckless endangerment and illegal possession of military-grade explosives. He tried to blame everyone else, the truck manufacturer, the neighbors, even the Homeowners Association. But nobody was having it. He's facing some serious fines and possible jail time. He had to sell his house to cover his legal fees and moved back in with his parents. The neighborhood is finally peaceful again. I've been renting this small apartment for about 3 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom unit in a modest building, but it's been my home. I'm a freelancer, so I need a stable place with good internet to run my business. When I first moved in, the landlord seemed decent enough. Sure, there were some red flags, like how he'd sometimes forget to fix things right away or make excuses about maintenance issues, but I could deal with that. Things started getting weird about 6 months ago when he began asking oddly personal questions about my work and income. He dropped by unannounced, which I now know is illegal, and tried to chat about my clients and how my business was doing. I should have seen it as more than just annoying small talk, but hindsight is 20/20, right? The real nightmare started 2 weeks ago. I was working on a project when my phone started buzzing with credit alert notifications. At first, I thought it was a glitch. 3 new credit cards and 5 hard inquiries in just 2 days. I never applied for any new cards. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. I immediately called the credit card companies. When I reached the first customer service representative, I explained that there was a fraudulent credit card application in my name. They asked me to verify my address, which I did. That's when they told me something concerning. The application showed a different address. It was my landlord's house address with a fake apartment number 1/2 added to it. The second credit card company confirmed the same thing. This wasn't some random identity theft. This was calculated and personal. I called the police to file a report. Later that day, my landlord called me in a rage. He was furious that I had contacted the police and demanded that I leave his property within 5 days. When I pointed out that he had committed identity theft, and that wasn't how eviction worked, he just threatened to change the locks. I hung up on him rather than continue the conversation. The next morning, I found a poorly printed 5-day notice taped to my door. It looked like something he'd typed up himself, probably after Googling how to evict tenant. I took it down and documented everything with photos. My gut was telling me this wasn't just about identity theft anymore. I did some digging online and found out he'd listed his house for sale at the end of January. Then I learned through another tenant that our building was being sold too. It all started making sense. He was trying to cash out and probably skip the country. I went straight to the courthouse to file for a restraining order. While I was there, I met a police detective handling my case. The detective revealed that they had been investigating my landlord already and that I wasn't his first victim. They told me there had been 3 other complaints in the last month, all from tenants, all with similar credit card fraud attempts. I felt sick but also relieved that I caught it early. None of the credit cards had actually arrived in the mail yet, so he hadn't been able to spend anything. I'd already frozen my credit and disputed everything. That evening I heard him trying to get into my apartment with a key. Thanks to the chain lock I'd installed, against his protests, he couldn't get in. Through the door, he started making threats about how I would regret this and claiming he had powerful friends. I told him that everything was being recorded and that the police were on their way. He ran off, but not before I got video of the attempt on my phone. The police arrived within minutes. Turns out they'd been watching his house, suspecting he was planning to flee the country. They arrested him that night at the airport with a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. The detective later told me they found evidence of at least 12 other identity theft attempts in his house, along with fake IDs and credit cards. He'd been running this scam on multiple properties he owned, taking advantage of the personal information he had access to as a landlord. Now he's facing multiple federal charges for identity theft, fraud, and attempted illegal eviction. The building's new owners turned out to be a legitimate property management company, and they've assured all tenants that our leases will be honored. I'm still dealing with the credit bureaus to clean up my credit report, but at least I know he can't hurt anyone else. The detective mentioned they're planning to seize his properties as part of the investigation, which means he'll have a lot more to worry about than fake credit cards where he's going. For context, I've been married to my wife for 5 years. We both work full-time jobs and managed to buy a modest house in a nice subdivision 2 years ago. Life was good until my wife's brother needed a place to stay. It started last year when he lost his apartment because he couldn't keep up with the rent payments. He claimed he just needed a few months to get back on his feet and save enough money for a new place. Since he's family, we agreed to let him stay in our spare room temporarily. My wife was especially eager to help, remembering how their parents had always taught them to look out for each other. I had my doubts but kept them to myself. That was 12 months ago. In this entire year, he hasn't contributed a single cent to our household. Not for bills, not for groceries, nothing. He works as a motorcycle mechanic but somehow never has money to help out. Instead, he spends his paycheck on bike modifications and going on long rides with his friends. We would watch him install expensive new parts on his motorcycle while claiming he couldn't afford to chip in for utilities. The hypocrisy was staggering. He treats our house like a hotel, except even hotel guests are more respectful. He leaves dirty dishes in the sink for days, never takes out the trash, and keeps his room in complete chaos. My wife, being his sister, always makes excuses for him and ends up cleaning after him. She would say things like, "He's just going through a rough patch," or "He'll get better once he finds his footing." But months went by and nothing changed. One day I tried asking him to help around the house, at least with his own dishes. He just brushed me off, saying he'd do them later because he was busy. He was playing some mobile game sprawled on our couch, energy drink cans scattered around him. As expected, the dishes stayed there until my wife eventually cleaned them. This became such a common occurrence that I started doing the dishes myself just to spare my wife the extra work after her long shifts at the hospital. This pattern continued for months, but last week was the final straw. He came home late from one of his rides. I was already in bed when I heard his motorcycle pull up, the engine unnecessarily loud in our quiet neighborhood. The next morning, we couldn't find our dog anywhere in the house. Our beloved pet of 12 years, who had been with us through everything, was missing. This was the dog that had helped my wife through her depression after her mother passed away. The one who would wait by the door every evening for us to come home from work. When I asked him about the gate, he gave a vague response, saying he thought he locked it but wasn't sure because he was tired. When I pressed him for a clear answer, he got defensive and dismissed the situation, saying it was just a dog. He couldn't even look me in the eye while saying this, instead keeping his attention on his phone screen. We spent hours searching the neighborhood. My wife made posts on Facebook while I drove around calling our dog's name. Each street we checked without finding him felt like another punch to the gut. Then we got the call. Someone recognized our dog from the Facebook post. He had been hit by a car just outside our subdivision. The woman who called us was in tears, describing how she had stayed with him until the end, making sure he wasn't alone. When we got home, devastated and grief-stricken, my brother-in-law had the audacity to act annoyed. He tried to deflect responsibility, saying it wasn't his fault and that these things just happen. He even offered to buy us a new dog, as if our pet of 12 years was simply replaceable. The casual way he talked about replacing our dog while scrolling through his phone and chewing loudly made my blood boil. That's when I lost it. I confronted him about everything. His freeloading for a year, never paying bills, never helping with anything, and now his carelessness had led to our dog's death. He responded by calling me a drama queen, insisting he hadn't killed the dog on purpose. His voice was filled with the same entitled attitude that had characterized his entire stay with us. I told him to pack his stuff and get out. When he tried to protest, saying he couldn't be kicked out because it was his sister's house too, I gave him until tomorrow evening to leave. I could see the shock on his face. Probably the first time in his adult life someone had actually held him accountable for his actions. My wife tried to intervene, suggesting I was being too harsh, but I stood my ground. I explained to her that I couldn't live like this anymore. He had shown zero respect for our home, our rules, and now his negligence had cost us our dog's life. I reminded her of all the times she'd come home exhausted from her nursing shifts, only to spend another hour cleaning up after her brother. He left the next day, making sure to slam the door and rev his motorcycle engine as loud as possible. He's been staying with different friends, sending my wife guilt-tripping messages about how her husband turned her against her own brother. Each message was more manipulative than the last, trying to paint himself as the victim of an unreasonable brother-in-law. My wife was upset at first, but when she found his room after he left, reality hit her hard. There were moldy food containers under the bed, cigarette burns on the windowsill. We don't allow smoking in the house. And he'd apparently been using our Wi-Fi to mine cryptocurrency, explaining our suspiciously high electric bills. The room smelled so bad we had to keep the windows open for days. Finding all this helped her realize that her brother wasn't just going through a rough patch. He was taking advantage of her kindness. Sometimes being family isn't enough of a reason to keep toxic people in your life. I just wish it hadn't cost us our dog to learn that lesson. We've since adopted a new rescue dog, but we still keep our old dog's collar hanging by the door. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.